Chapter 4. Putting Transformative Theory into Practice. The Purple House Mediation with Commentary, Part 1. As more practitioners and programs have moved toward the transformative model, in the kinds of developments described in the previous chapter, we have found that one crucial step in moving from theory to practice is actually observing a transformative mediation session. Prior to observing the model in action, many mediators who resonate with the principles strongly believe that their own practice follow the model. This is often true to some extent, but when mediators see the model in action, they often find many of its practices quite different from what they are familiar with, and from what they expected to see. They begin to see that there are truly distinctive interventions used in this model, so that ultimately it makes sense to see it as a unique model of mediation, not simply a stylistic variation of other approaches to practice. In short, it turns out that a picture is indeed worth 1,000 words when it comes to getting a real grasp of what transformative mediation entails in practice. For this reason, we are including here, as a concrete example of transformative mediation in practice, the complete transcript of a simulated mediation conducted by one of the authors, Baruch, that was videotaped as part of the Practice Enrichment Initiative. The simulation was produced on videotape by Sally Pope for the Institute for the Study of Conflict Transformation, and both the videotape and the transcript represent a complete live session without anything edited out. The simulation is based on a real case, but the parties are played by professional actors. The session itself was completely unscripted and unrehearsed, with the actors playing out their roles spontaneously, working from basic information about their characters and the facts of the dispute, summarized in the following discussion. Though simulated, this mediation gives a very good sense of the dynamics of a transformative mediation session, including both the parties' interaction and the mediator's interventions. It is not offered here as an ideal model of practice, because even within the transformative model there are different styles, and a different mediator might have made different interventions consistent with the model. It is nevertheless a good example of thoughtful, well-crafted practice of the transformative model. In training sessions, we have found that this tape conveys very effectively how transformative mediation is practiced. We believe that including the case here will provide the reader a good exposure to the concrete experience of observing a transformative mediation session, to the extent possible in a written volume. To give the reader a feel for the parties and the case, here is some brief background information. The parties are homeowners in an exclusive and expensive housing development, The Trees. Julie is a woman in her 40s, white, who's been a resident with the development for about 8 years. She is chair of the development's Architectural Control Committee. Elizabeth is also in her 40s, an African-American woman who bought a home in the development within the past year or so. She resides there with her daughter, Bernice, a young woman in her late teens or early 20s, an art student who accompanies her mother to the mediation. Both Elizabeth and Julie are well-dressed, well-spoken women. Elizabeth comes to the session dressed elegantly in tailored suit and matching hat, which she wears throughout the session. Julie is dressed in a businesslike pantsuit, and Bernice is wearing the normal jeans and sweater of a young person her age. The mediator is wearing coat and tie. The basic facts, and the only information given to the actors prior to the simulation, are these. Shortly after moving into their home, Elizabeth and Bernice repainted the house. The color they chose for repainting was one that the development's Architectural Control Committee found objectionable, and the committee claimed that the use of this color violated a covenant in the development's standard homeowner contract. When the committee and Elizabeth could not agree about the matter, the parties' lawyers recommended that they contact a mediator to see if this would help. The mediator, a private practitioner, spoke with both parties by phone before the session to explain the nature of the process, but otherwise has minimal information about the situation. The mediation session is being held in the mediator's office, and the transcript begins with the very opening of the session. As previously noted, the simulation was totally unrehearsed, and the mediator had no advance knowledge of what the parties would say or do. It was as close as possible to a genuine live mediation. The transcript presented here in 6 segments, each followed by a brief commentary highlighting aspects of the parties' interaction and the mediator's interventions that offer particularly good examples of the way the model works. The entire session lasted about 75 minutes. For readers interested in getting more immediate feel of what the session was like, the parties' personalities, the tone of their conversation, and so forth, the videotape from which the transcript was made can be ordered from the Institute for the Study of Conflict Transformation, whose address is found in the acknowledgments.
The Purple House Mediation, Segment 1.
Good afternoon to everybody. I just want to sort of review. I think I've spoken with you all on the phone before today, but I'm not sure I know who's who in the room, so maybe it would be helpful if everybody tells me who's who.
I'm Bernice.
Okay.
And I'm Elizabeth. This is my daughter.
Okay, very good. I'm glad
and
to
we
meet
own
you.
The home
Right. Good to meet you in person,
Yes.
and you can call me Baruch if that's okay.
Okay.
And Julie.
I am
you'd be
Julie, yes,
Okay.
and I'm chairman of the Architectural Control Committee in our Homeowners Association.
Okay, and that would be the trees development?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, we spoke a little bit on the phone about what mediation is, what it means to come to a mediation meeting or session. Would it be helpful to review that a little bit now, or are you all pretty clear on that? What's your view on that? Should I, in other words, sort of go over a little bit what we spoke of before, just to bring it back up, or are we ready to just jump in?
Sure. Please go over a little bit.
Okay,
yes,
fine. That's okay?
That would be fine.
What I see happening here is basically a conversation between all of you about the concerns that you have, the issues that have come up, and my role in the process is to be helpful to you in having the most productive conversation you can have about that stuff, including understanding the way you see, each of you, the situation, the way each of you sees the situation, the decisions that face you, what you want to do about those decisions, and also how you...
Well, I want it resolved. That's what I want to do about it.
Okay, and clearly that's part of that's one place that those decisions can lead to, Julie, based upon the decisions you make along the way. All of that is basically in your hands, and also part of what can happen in the conversation is for you to review and assess how you see one another and how you see one another's situation and positions. So in the conversation, all of those kinds of things can surface, and as you sort of walk through that and make decisions along the way, it will lead you to whatever ultimate point all of you decide you want to get to. I'm not going to make decisions for you in any way here, really, whether decisions about how to have the conversation or what to talk about or where to wind up. I see my role as helping you to have the conversation, listening to you, helping you listen to yourselves in a way, as well as to each other. That's a sort of general way of describing the mediation process, at least as I practice it. So does that seem like it might be helpful to you to proceed as we spoke about before? Is that...
Yes.
Yeah?
I guess we won't know until we try.
Well, that's true, but you have to be willing to try at least.
I'm here.
Okay. And I guess one place to start to see how you want to handle that is just to ask you if there's anything you want to say about sort of guidelines for the conversation itself, in terms of, the way the talk goes, who taking turns, or just having a conversation in a free-flow way. What feels most comfortable to you about guidelines, or do you need to talk about that at all?
No, I don't think so.
No? Just see what happens, basically.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Just one thing I want to say in terms of my guidelines, that when I work with people, I do so on a basis of confidentiality. So what that means is that I'm not going to discuss anything that any of you talks about in here with anyone outside of this room. I don't know why that should come up anyway, as far as I can see, but I just want to reassure you that that in that sense, you're having a private conversation, as far as I'm concerned, and there's no way that it's going to become public through me. So I want to reassure you about that. If I sometimes take notes just to keep track of where I am, but this is essentially for my, for convenience for me, just to keep track of where things are flowing. Okay. Where would you like to start? How would you like to begin? Does any of you feel like it would be useful to jump in and start off?
Certainly.
You want to start off, too?
Yeah, would that be okay with you?
Is that right?
I am, as I told you, Baruch, chairperson of the Architectural Control Committee in our trees development, and it is the concern of not only the committee itself, but also several members of the community that when Elizabeth and Bernice moved into their home, they opted to paint it purple.
I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off.
Mauve, purple, mauve, whatever. This is not in keeping with the colors of the other homes in the community. And we do have a policy in place that says any homeowner who's going to make major changes in his or her home has to get prior approval from the Architectural Control Committee, and they did not do that. They just went ahead and painted their home purple. And honestly, if you could see it, it stands out in, my apologies, but in a way that is just really not in keeping with the rest of the community. And we want them to repaint the home.
Okay, so
I think that's basically it.
So what I'm hearing from your point of view, Julie, is that and you're here not just as yourself, but in effect representing some committee from the development.
That's correct.
That from your point of view, the choice of color that Elizabeth and Bernice chose for the house that they bought in the development, and you're describing that as purple, is out of keeping with the rest of the character of the development.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And the committee, again, I'm assuming you're speaking for this committee, would like to see that, would like to see them repaint the house, and that would put it more in keeping, as you see it, with the other
tenor of the community.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
May I speak? First of all, I believe that we have a document of, I don't know, it might be 15 or 20 pages that outline the parameters that are involved in the maintenance and the control of the property. And nowhere in any of those pages does it talk about painting. We are well within our rights. Secondly, I believe I can give a list of at least, 10 or 12 neighbors and the various community members who have no objection. Thirdly, it is a pastel color. And fourthly, I could name you at least 5 to 7 other members of the community who have painted their homes other colors than gray, tan, or yellow that it says in the that is so typical of the Architectural Control Committee.
I like purple myself. I think it's a nice color.
Well, I think it's a nice color too, Bernice, but not for a house.
It's not your house.
No, it's not my house, but I do have a responsibility as
And you've met
chair.
your responsibility, and we disagree.
There are other colors.
And that's why we're here.
There's other colors in the other homes that are trimmed, It might not be a mauve, but there are other colors.
Well,
I
and
don't
speaking of
understand.
trim, you've got some sort of turquoisey blue trim. It's
Because you don't like it?
it's a very
You've been on a campaign for the
jarring
last 6 months simply because you do not
combination.
like it?
I went to art school, I'm sorry, and I read a book in school and in history class about living in color, and it really does work, I'm an artist.
What does that mean? Living in color works.
She doesn't have to define it. We like the color. We have paid, $650,000 for this house, and I think we can paint any color we want. Polka dots, if it's our choice. We don't have to defend our taste to you.
Actually, polka dot would not be acceptable either.
Show me the page. You got the contract? Show me the pages.
My dear, I told you, it's
My
major
dear, excuse
changes
me?
in.
Well, it's not what my mom is trying to say. She's just a little emotional right now. But, Mom.
Now, Bernice.
Well, my mom, she's speaking from the truth, but she's saying that, why shouldn't we be able to paint the house the color that we choose? Because in our contract, it doesn't state, do not paint your house mauve. And when other neighbors have painted theirs with the teal and beige and white and like hints of blue, I didn't see anything in the contract that stated that we could not paint it.
So if I can just say what I'm hearing from Elizabeth, from you and Bernice, and part of that is a sense of pretty strong feelings about your choices and your freedom to make those choices, having bought the house, that you don't see in any of the formal agreements that were made in purchasing the house any restriction on the way the house is painted.
No,
And-
other than that it doesn't suit her taste.
Okay, and so you don't see this as being, you don't see the paint that you chose, the color that you chose, as violating those agreements in any way.
And in no way, no how.
Right, and that having paid a substantial price for the house, that you're really free to paint it any way that you choose, but that I also hear you saying that there's a considerable number of people in the development, your neighbors, who have expressed to you they have no problem with the choice
None
you've made.
whatsoever.
Well, I do think I could match the number of people that have said to you that they have no problem with it, which, when you think about it, is kind of a negative way to say it, with people who have come to us as the control committee and said, you have to do something about that house. It's like a neon light in the middle of the community. It's like having a great big McDonald's sign right there.
Well,
It
is
just-
it possible that we could find out who they are? Because I go to school with about 5 or 6, other kids that live in the block. We go to art school together, and their families don't have a problem with us. So I like to know who they are.
that would be possible.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter, Bernice. It doesn't matter. Julie, ever since we have moved into this community, I think it's because the house is 4 or 5 doors from yours. You have been on it seems like a personal vendetta. Is it because we're the only blacks on your block?
Absolutely not.
Commentary, Segment 1. The conversation about the Purple House has clearly become very heated very quickly. How that heat is dealt with and how the conversation evolves are evident in the following segments of the mediation. First, however, here is some analysis of the mediator's interventions in this opening segment of the session. 1. Notice first how the mediator opens the session. He avoids making an opening statement as such and instead has an opening conversation with the parties. He sets an interactional tone from the very first moments of the session, rather than simply launching into a formal opening statement. In talking about the process and explaining his role as mediator, he explains that he will support the parties in thinking about what they want to do, considering how they want to see each other, and making decisions about what to do in the situation. These are some of the simple language ways of expressing what we describe in Chapter 2 as supporting empowerment and recognition shifts in terms that parties can understand. In talking about the possible outcomes of the mediation, the mediator notes that resolution is one of the possibilities, but also points out that other useful things can result for the parties, such as gaining clarity in their assessment of the situation and what they want to do. From the beginning, the process has a broader focus than agreement. The mediator describes a session as a conversation, not as a mediation, not as exploring resolution, not even as a session. Conversation is something that everyone understands, so parties sense right away that this is something they can do, increasing their sense of competency and control. In addition, the conversation metaphor is in tune with the focus of the model on party interaction rather than settlement per se. 2. A second important element of the mediator's practice in this segment is that he allows and supports party control and choice from the earliest moments of the mediation. He begins by asking them if they want him to review how the process works, immediately giving them control over what is and what is not discussed. When the parties show no interest in setting up specific guidelines for the conversation, the mediator accepts their decision right away and moves on, not imposing on them a discussion about ground rules that they are not interested in. As the opening conversation finishes, the mediator asks the parties themselves to determine who should speak first instead of making this decision for them. When the parties interrupt him or each other, the mediator draws back, not trying to control the interruption. Similarly, when the parties begin to get angry, he does not step in to diffuse or control their anger. Thus, the mediator starts from the very beginning of the mediation to turn control of the process over to the parties and follow their lead. Further examples of this are noted in the commentary on the next segment of the case. The third major point in this segment is that the mediator uses one of the specific forms of intervention that are characteristic of the transformative model, reflection. In reflection, the mediator mirrors back to the speaker what the mediator believes the speaker has just expressed, capturing both the substance and the emotional tone of what the speaker has said. Reflection is one of the most powerful things that transformative mediators do to help parties make interactional shifts. It is a move that supports both empowerment and recognition shifts for both the speaking and the listening party. For the speaking party, the mediator's reflection allows that party to hear herself speak and then to have a kind of conversation with herself. First Julie and then Elizabeth, each in response to the mediator's reflection on her comment, nods her head emphatically, saying something like, "Yes, that's right, absolutely." In effect, each one hears herself in the room and draws strength from this itself. In addition, in hearing herself, each gains in clarity, confirming that, yes, that's what I wanted to say, that's the way I see things, or she modifies her statement slightly, becoming clearer by doing so. The impact of reflection for the speaking party is to help her gather her sense of clarity and decisiveness about what she wants to say, how she wants to present herself, and to grow stronger in the process. At the same time, the mediator's reflection to the speaker allows the other party to listen in from a safe distance, considering more fully what the speaker has said. When the mediator reflects the speaker's comment, the listening party often hears the comment for the first time because she has been filtering out the speaker's voice. The mediator's reflection in a new voice allows the listening party to hear things she might not have heard clearly before and begin getting new information about the situation, an empowerment shift toward greater clarity. This happens here as Julie listens to the reflection of Elizabeth's comment about her view of the contract. The effect is that Julie begins to realize more clearly how strong Elizabeth's opposition is going to be and why. Reflection can also help the speaker make recognition shifts by allowing her to hear when she has gone too far and reconsider and retract negative comments. And it can help the listener make recognition shifts by allowing the listener to hear the speaker's comments for the first time or in a different way because of the reflector's voice. This emerges in later segments. In general, reflection acts as an amplifier of the conversation for each party. It makes what is being said more audible and intelligible to both parties. To accomplish all of this, the mediator must follow certain guidelines in reflection, as demonstrated in this case. In his reflections, the mediator engages directly and only with the speaking party, whose comments he is reflecting. The mediator does not move back and forth. He does not speak at all to Elizabeth when he is reflecting to Julie. He is fully and directly engaged only with Julie at that time. Similarly, when reflecting to Elizabeth, he is engaged only with Elizabeth and not bringing Julie in. This mode of direct, exclusive engagement helps both parties. Beginning with the first reflection to Julie, it helps Julie really listen to herself through the mediator, becoming clearer and stronger in what she's saying. And it helps Elizabeth when the mediator is reflecting with Julie, because it allows Elizabeth to have private space and not be put on the spot as she would be if the mediator were to ask what she thinks of Julie's comment. Reflection means mirroring to the speaker whatever she has expressed. The mediator does not carry the speaker's message to the other party because this would both make the mediator the speaker's advocate and put the listener on the spot. Other guidelines for reflection are also demonstrated by the mediator here. Providing an undistorted mirror, a reflection is most effective when it's inclusive, capturing the full range of what has been expressed without editing, softening, or filtering what the speaker has said. Including reflection of emotions expressed by the parties, this means not just what has been said, but how the speaker appears to be feeling. What is being reflected is any and all communication or expression, not just speech. Reflection usually carries its own confirmation. An effective reflection will usually evoke an immediate confirmation response from the speaker, like the party's response to the reflections in this segment. Even if a reflection misses the mark, it usually evokes a response from the speaker that cures the mistake. That's not it at all. Here's what I said, or I'm not just mad, I said furious. In other words, the positive empowerment effects of reflection can occur whether the speaker confirms or corrects the reflection. In either case, the speaker is gaining clarity and strength, as occurs in this case.
The Purple House Mediation, Segment 2.
It seems like a personal vendetta. Is it because we're the only blacks on your block?
Absolutely not.
I beg to differ. Ever since you have become head of the committee, this control committee, you have been out. Now, 4 doors or 5 doors down, Mr. Wataski painted his house, what? Was it that salmon color or blue? Blue with salmon color? Nobody objected to him.
Oh, please, Bernice.
Oh, please.
I mean, Elizabeth, excuse me. I'm so sorry.
That's right. What? I am just tired of her. It is a racist. They've got 5, I can name them, 5 families. What? Gold?
Elizabeth, it has nothing to do with your color. It has to do with the color of your house.
Oh,
and it is very different. And
we are the only ones. We are the only family that you are attacking. The only
purple house.
Because you don't like purple?
It isn't because I don't like purple. I represent a committee.
Well, there is nothing. We have met all of the dictates of the contract, and that is it. There's nothing more to talk about because you don't like purple, because you are a racist. That's what this is really all about.
Listen, you knew when you
are the racist. You are the one.
You knew when you moved into this community that there were certain rules and regulations that you had to abide by.
And none of them were met until you got to be chairman of this committee.
And major changes in the structure, as evidenced by this purple paint.
We did not change the structure. To put paint on a surface is not changing the structure.
And I really have a problem with your saying I'm a racist.
Well, I'm sure you do. Of course it is.
Well, I think we're here to talk about the house, and like I said, my mom might be a little upset.
You better say something to them because I'm getting very upset.
There's nothing. I haven't found any complaints. Like I said, from the families that surround us and on our block, because I go to school with them. And like I said, they have other colors in their trimmings of their house also.
Let me just ask all of you, and obviously there are some very strong feelings about not just the house, but Elizabeth, you feel that there's some issues about the position that Julie is taking based upon her attitudes towards you as an African American.
I really do.
Okay, and
I'm
Julie,
sorry to say that.
Okay.
I moved into the community. It's an interracial community. It's beautiful.
And then why am I not picking on all the other?
But what about
That's what I want to know. That's really what I want to know. The other 4 or 5 homes that are not what?
But why am I not picking up picking on all the other African American families in the
Because
community?
I guess their house isn't, I think they're Mr. Williams has a white house.
Because their houses
And it's not
conform to
four-door.
the rules and the regulations
But what
of
are
the
the rules and
community.
regulations? Because
No,
the Hendersons, they have that salmon with that deep bluish. And,
That's right.
Trim.
Thank you.
And I don't see the difference.
But they're not on her
between that
street.
and the purple. I mean, I don't understand how did our house
What
get
you
kicked
describe
out?
as salmon, I would call pale pink.
Oh, it's a
Well,
matter of
salmon-
taste.
Much
Yeah, but
subtler
salmon
than that.
and trimmed in a deep blue. I mean, and what is that? In comparison
But
to
that's
our
not
mom?
a purple house.
Yeah, but it seems like a personal thing with you now that you don't like purple. Someone might say they don't like blue. I don't think there's anything wrong with
I
purple.
just want to sort of frame what you're talking about in terms of the different issues that you're discussing, if it's helpful at all. One issue is what the colors actually are, and you're characterizing the colors one way, and Bernice and Elizabeth you're characterizing them differently. That's kind of I guess a hard thing to have an objective measure of, but certainly you're seeing the actual colors that are involved here differently. But it sounds like you're also disagreeing about what the rules actually are. And Julie, you're saying that there are some clear rules that apply here, and Bernice and Elizabeth, you're saying that there are rules, but this is an area that they don't really cover, or that's it's left to your choice basically. And you're also disagreeing about the responses of other people in the community. And Elizabeth, you and Bernice are saying there's really no problem that people are having with this, as you've experienced it. And Julie, you're saying that there really are numbers of people who have a problem with it, and that you're essentially speaking for them.
But I'm not denying that some people may be supporting you and saying they have no problem. I'm not denying that.
What I just am trying to do is to sort of point out to you some areas where you have some pretty strong disagreements, and also on the issue of what's the motivation. Obviously, Elizabeth, you've said that you feel very upset because of what you see as a racial dimension to this, and Julie, you're saying that there's really none of that involved, and this has to do with the specifics of the situation. So there's a number of differences that in the way the situation looks from your
Every other
perspective
person
and
on her
yours.
block, I was told, when they moved in, got baskets of welcoming. Our family did not. She was, at that time, just, I think, made chairman of the control committee. We were the only blacks on her block. That was the first. I didn't think too much of it. I think the second incident was where the car was parked in a place and there was an anonymous complaint about it, and that came through us. Of course, that was hearsay through another party, that it was her complaint. I have tried to get on several of the committees myself, and Julie has said, well, I don't think so, maybe not at this time, but there have just been one thing after another that I really believe is racist. I'm sorry, but I do. I have faced it all of my life. I have tried to shield my daughter from it, and I was hoping that moving in this community, I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to be sorry.
My mom basically, she's saying it's one thing after the next. I know we're here to discuss the house, but she's just full right now because of the other things that she feels has gone on. But, clearly I don't see, why this is really an issue. We all are homeowners, and everyone seems to have color trimmed on their house, whether it be blue or mauve or teal or salmon. And because Miss Julie doesn't like purple as opposed to someone's ultramarine blue or cobalt blue or whatever. That just seems like a preference, like a personal thing, and to me, it shouldn't even be an issue. Is what I'm saying here.
Well, where do we go from here?
Well, that's sort of what I was going to ask you after talking about those differences that you have, and I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I just want you to know, Elizabeth, that my son-in-law is African American. And I bet you didn't even know that. And I do not.
The one you don't speak to, or that you haven't had over your home?
Oh, I have had him over to my home many times. They live a long way away. They don't come a lot.
Julie, that is like saying my best friend is black. Please.
But it's my son-in-law. It's my family. It's not the same at all. And I just...
Anyway, the house. Let's get back to the house, because
Fine.
we will never resolve this 400-year-old
And
issue.
I did not...
Commentary, Segment 2. As noted earlier, the parties' conversation gets heated quite quickly, and this intensifies in Segment 2. At the same time, the substance of the discussion gets more complicated and tangled in this segment. The mediator's interventions are geared to both of these developments in the dynamics of the parties' interaction. 1. First, notice how the mediator responds to the escalating anger and emotion and the rapid-fire party exchange that characterize the first part of this segment, including what the mediator does and does not do. Despite the parties' angry, emotional exchange, the mediator does not intervene to diffuse or contain the emotion. This is intentional, and it is a clear reflection of his commitment to party choice and control. Supporting party choice in the transformative model includes not only choices about outcome, but also choices about process. Indeed, the model rejects the conventional distinction between the two. For parties, choosing how they want to talk about things, including expressing strong emotions, is an important decision and one to be left within their control. The mediator here works hard, though it isn't visible in the transcript, to remain calm and unperturbed, even when high emotions flare. Doing otherwise might implicitly discourage emotional expression. The mediator is careful not to cut off the parties' conversation, whether emotional or not. When they speak, he rarely interrupts. When they interrupt him, he quickly stops. He supports their conversation without taking it over. His challenge is to find a place to enter, to know when it is his turn. To do this, he listens to the rhythm of the conversation, waiting for lulls when the parties' talk slows down, as occurs late in this segment. He also notices that Bernice tends to speak only when the primary interaction between Elizabeth and Julie falters, and he uses her comments as signals that it is possible for him to step in after her. In reflecting, after a party has spoken emotionally, as with Elizabeth in this segment, the mediator supports her by not filtering out the emotion or heat in what she has said. He does his best to help her and Julie hear the full range of what she's saying. He includes reference to the tone and feeling of her comments, not just the substance. He also includes reference to her accusation of racism, even though this is obviously an inflammatory statement. 2. In this segment, the mediator uses another form of intervention characteristic of the transformative model, a summary. In a summary, the mediator organizes and condenses what the parties have talked about into the topics of discussion that were introduced. Like reflection, summary can be a powerful tool for supporting empowerment and recognition shifts for both parties, depending again on how it's used, as illustrated in this case. Summary can help the party see the big picture of their conversation, get clear, and make choices. Conflict conversation often unfolds so rapidly and intensely, covering so much ground, that parties lose track of what they've said, where they are, or what they want to do next, as occurs in this case. Elizabeth and Julie get bogged down in this kind of confusion during this segment, going from the race issue to the rules about painting to the facts about the paint colors, back to race, and so on. The mediator's summary helps part the fog of this confusion, displaying all of the topics they've covered and allowing them to see a kind of map of what they've discussed, assess where they now stand, and choose for themselves the most important area to address next. Elizabeth does this, with her clear choice, after the summary, to focus on the race issue. Summary can also help parties express and appreciate how differently they see things, helping to support both empowerment and recognition shifts. The mediator's summary reveals that there are sharp differences between Elizabeth and Julie in almost every area they've talked about. As a result of the summary, Elizabeth expresses her perceptions of racism more fully, gaining in clarity, and Julie begins to realize how Elizabeth sees things, even tries to respond, though her response is rejected. Like reflection, summary has an amplification effect, but now at the level of conversation rather than individual comment. It makes the conversation as a whole, including the differences revealed and the choices offered, more visible to the parties, so they can make clearer choices about what to do. To accomplish this, certain guidelines for summary should be followed, as demonstrated here. The mediator's summary, unlike his reflections, directly involves both parties. That is, he includes what both Julie and Elizabeth have said during this chunk of the conversation, and he delivers it in a way that addresses both parties together. His summary is not a playback of everything they've said, but rather a thematic condensation of the topics of discussion that have emerged from both parties' comments. Topics summarized should include not only those that the parties agree about, but also and especially those that they disagree about, the topics of disagreement. This summary is entirely topics of disagreement because that is what the parties discussed, as is often the case early in a mediation. The summary includes the views that each side expressed on each topic, which helps the parties see what their differences are and decide what to do about them. The mediator's summary is full and undiluted. It uses party language where possible and does not omit any topics brought up. Most important, it does not soften or dilute Julie's and Elizabeth's differences. On the contrary, it highlights and even sharpens differences in order to support clarity and choice, including the choice to give recognition or not. As with reflection, summary often produces its own confirmation of effective practice. After the summary, parties will usually move the conversation in a direction that the mediator could not have predicted. The unpredictable movement is the sign that the summary was effective in supporting party choice, unaffected by any mediator judgment or agenda. In this case, Elizabeth's choice to focus on her experience of racism was just such a decision, entirely of her own making. 3. Finally, at the end of the segment, the mediator uses another characteristic transformative intervention, a check-in. Having made the choice to focus on her concerns about race and unhappy with Julie's response, Elizabeth is uncertain of what to do and looks to the mediator for direction. His response is simply to offer that decision back to her, checking in to see what she wants to do. She then makes the decision and returns to the topic of the house, also by her own choice, unprompted by the mediator at either point. This conversation is being driven entirely by party choice, supported by the mediator's interventions, a classic characteristic of transformative mediation, which continues in the following segment.
The Purple House Mediation, Segment 3.
Anyway, the house. Let's get back to the house, because we will never resolve this. This is a 400-year-old
And
issue.
I did not report
The
anything about a
house.
car or any of these
The
things.
house is...
And who sends you those bouquets,
We
those
are-
welcome packages? What?
We are well within our rights to paint our house any color we want. There is nothing in the 20 or 15 or 20 pages that we have sent, that we have signed, that we are violating any rule, and we are not repainting the house. It has cost several thousands of dollars to have it painted. We stand, and you have to do what you have to do.
Did it ever occur to you that maybe the color of your house was the cause of some of these incidents alleged that you've described, and not the color of your skin? Did it ever occur to you that maybe you weren't fitting in because of the choices
we
you
don't
made
fit
in your
in.
house?
You are the first person who's
But
ever uttered those words.
Miss Julie fit in where? Like I said.
Please don't call her Miss Julie.
Right. I'm just Julie.
Well, Julie, I would like I said, I would like to know who is complaining, because I have a lot of friends in the neighborhood that houses are blue, salmon, different colors trimmed.
Well, do you know
And we
who's on
get
the
along
committee? Do you know who's on the
good.
committee?
Some of the people.
You know
yes.
that you should know the names of those people.
Are they the people
They've
that
asked
complain?
me to come to you and talk to you about
Well, you
it.
have done that, and we disagree.
Right.
And we're not going to change the color of her house. Now what?
It is our belief that you are in violation of.
Well, it is our belief
The
that we are
covenant.
not in violation of the covenant.
Well, we didn't see anything in the covenant that said that we shouldn't paint our
Well,
house
and
mauve.
and
Just like my neighbor didn't see anything in the covenant where they shouldn't trim their house in blue. And a difference
So-
between mauve and blue.
your trim is some kind of blue.
We don't need to go into that. We've already gone into that.
talking
We
about
don't
the
wanna
color of the
Right, we've
house,
got it.
not-
Okay, now what? We're
not
not going
the
to
trim.
change it.
Well, okay, and again, let me just look. What I hear you saying to each other is that there's basically some serious disagreements about, apart from what attitudes are involved and what motivations are involved, and you disagree about that too. But you said, let's set that aside. That's certainly up to you. There's some real strong disagreements about what the colors are and what needs to be done about them from any, I guess it would be legal point of view. And you have strong disagreements about that. Is there any way in the conversation, I guess one question to ask is there any way in the conversation to resolve those disagreements about the meaning of the documents, for example, that you're disagreeing about? Or do you just disagree? Is that where you want to leave it today? Because that's certainly, again, that's all up to you.
Right.
Is there any way to work that through now, or it's not
Well, you
useful
tell
to
us.
pursue
You're the
it?
mediator. What you tell us?
Well,
I mean,
and as
what do we do when we reach a point like this? She obviously has her position, and we obviously have ours, and the two don't seem to be. What do you do in a case like that? I mean, we have a contract. I don't think we violated the contract. She says that we have violated the contract. So
It's not in. It doesn't state in the contract about whether your
About
house
the
is
painting of the house.
a blue or whether your house is a mauve.
Exactly.
And there are houses on the street that has a blue tint.
Exactly.
Ours
Right.
just happened to be a mauve.
Right, and
What's
so
the
you
difference?
see it as not all that
That's
different
just
from
like
what other
looking at
people
this
have
Not
done.
all
company.
that
Do you like
different.
green or do you like blue? I mean, come on.
Right, and you're saying you see it as not all that different, and you said you put several $1,000s into
Exactly,
painting the house,
yes.
so it doesn't seem to you reasonable, in effect, you're saying, to ask you to repaint it when it's not that different from theirs.
Exactly. And if we repaint our house, I think that all the neighbors should repaint theirs too.
no,
Just as
honey,
simple
no,
as
honey,
that.
honey. We're not going to repaint it.
I'm just saying that if that's what she's asking us to do.
I guess let me ask you one thing. And Julie, you're saying again that the way you see and your committee see the guidelines, they're clear enough to indicate that this would be over the line, and there is a difference from what other people have done. One way to, maybe a suggestion I can make is there anything that either of you wants to say or could say to the other that you think maybe they haven't thought of, that might change their view of the situation? Could you say anything beyond what you've said so far to Elizabeth and Bernice that might change the way they're seeing this? Or Elizabeth, Bernice, is there something that you haven't said you think you could say that might change the way that Julie is seeing this? I don't know what will make a difference to you here. This is really your situation, so I can't tell you what to do. It's clear that you have some pretty strong disagreements. Is there anything else that you might want to say to each other that you haven't thought of? Do you want some time to think about it?
I would like to say a couple of things. It is true that in the covenant there is nothing about painting. That is absolutely true. You're right. It has been the interpretation of this committee that the language that I've referred to included what we perceived as color choices that are not in line with the color choices on other houses in the community. But we're just one committee. I would certainly be willing to take this conversation to the board and see if they have another interpretation of it.
Julie, you know, it's very interesting. There's no diversity on that board or on the committee, and I find that rather curious. In this community that is really so very, very diverse, as we are well into the year 2000, and your committee nor your board reflects the diversity of this community. So I am really, at this point, hard pressed to really accept any decision of your board or of your committee. I don't think a legal document is interpretive. I think it's very precise. I think with 15 or 20 some odd pages that your committee and your board obviously paid thousands of dollars to draw up, had legal minds draw it up, that it is quite precise. And nowhere in this document does it say anything about paint, the color of the paint. We have not in any way changed the structure. We have not in any way violated what is in the document that your board and your committee has drawn up. And so it becomes a matter of taste, it becomes a matter of culture, it becomes a matter of control that I am simply at this point in time in my life not willing to deal with. I mean no disrespect. I mean no animosity. I think we have gone as far as we can go. I believe you're talking about seeing a lawyer. We certainly have consulted with ours. And I think perhaps we should let people who are not as myself, quite frankly, I'm very emotionally involved, obviously, by this meeting. You're very emotionally involved. So perhaps we should let some legal minds really settle it from here.
Well, we certainly could do that. I've offered to go to the board. You've said you don't think that would work because it isn't a diverse board. It's elected by the community. It's not an appointed board. I can't speak to that. I mean, you're right, but it is an elected board.
I'm sure you haven't come this far to us without having, some consultation with your committee and with your board.
Not with the board.
And what would the board do?
They might have a different interpretation of it.
Well,
I don't know.
Why didn't we go to the board before we came here?
Are you sure this is not an issue with you? Is it the board, or do you have a problem?
It isn't just me. Yes, I do have a problem.
So it's you.
Yes, I'm very comfortable representing the committee because I agree with this. But
Miss Julie,
it is not. Please don't call me Miss Julie.
Well,
I'm Julie.
I'm sorry, Julie. If you went to the board and you told them that you did not have a problem with Owl House, do you think they would agree with you?
I don't think I would do it that way. I think I would say, we disagree. We've gone to mediation. We weren't able to resolve it in mediation. Before we take the next step, I want to see what the board thinks about this language.
If you're going, I don't understand what going to the board would do, but I would really prefer a neutral representative, because I do feel that whether I go to argue my case or whether you go to argue against my case, that we are partial. So I would, if we're going to, and the emphasis and the pitch, tone, and inflection would certainly inform position. So I would prefer, if you're going to do that, if that's going to be done, that we have perhaps some of our peers and some of the community who do stand by us, who do certainly agree with us, to speak on our behalf, or if you want to go that route. Although I am at this point been fighting all my life and have no problem with taking it to the courts.
I guess the question then is, the general question is, does the idea of taking the matter to the board as a next step, in whatever fashion you described how you'd like to see that done, does that seem like in general something that would make sense to you?
Commentary, Segment 3. In this third segment, the mediator's positive interventions are few, but together with his continuing practice of allowing uninterrupted party exchange, they provide the fulcrum for some very powerful empowerment and recognition shifts by the parties. 1. First, this segment demonstrates again the concrete meaning of following the parties and supporting party choice on multiple levels. Elizabeth goes back to the concrete issue of the house and the covenant and turns away from the issues of race and relationship, and the mediator follows her and Julie right back into this narrower discussion. This illustrates clearly that the transformative mediator will support a transactional discussion if that is what the parties want to have. There is no hidden agenda on the mediator's part to reach underlying issues about relationships and the like. The mediator follows, the parties lead. The discussion about the house quickly stalls because their differences on this are very stark. Still, the mediator never makes the obvious suggestion that the parties simply look at the contract to clarify the matter. His intentional avoidance of this suggestion flows from the principle of supporting party choice-making. Examining the contract is a step the parties themselves could raise. In fact, early on, Elizabeth mentions it, but doesn't insist. Given that they are choosing not to take the document out, the transformative response is to assume that there is a reason for their choice and not to try to override it with a mediator suggestion. Given how this segment unfolds, it is clear that such a suggestion would have preempted Julie's subsequent choice to acknowledge the contract's terms voluntarily. When the discussion of the house and the covenant stalls, the mediator does a quick summary, and then he asks, a check-in, if the parties simply want to leave the matter in disagreement and end the session. This check-in is a response to the way the conversation is going. They disagree sharply and don't seem to have much more to say to each other. Such a situation is not a signal for the mediator to redouble his efforts to get a resolution. It is rather a time to simply highlight choices for the parties, and ending the session is clearly a choice at this point. When differences seem so significant that there may be no meeting of the minds, allowing them to come face to face with that moment of truth, and to realize that it is entirely their responsibility, offers them a powerful opportunity to gather strength, achieve clarity, and make choices. When the mediator asks here whether there is more that they can say, or is this where they want to leave it, it begins to bring home to Elizabeth and Julie the reality of this moment of truth. Then they begin to step up to the plate and make serious decisions, as discussed later in the chapter. Following a brief exchange with Elizabeth and Bernice, reinforcing the sense that a decision point is at hand, the mediator offers another check-in in the form of a process question. He asks the parties if there is anything else they want to say that might change each other's views, and he also asks if they need time to think. As before, the check-in serves to highlight for the parties their own responsibility for whether the discussion continues or ends. In addition, the mediator here is giving the parties the opportunity to call for a timeout if any of them feels the need either for time alone or for a separate meeting with the mediator. This illustrates that meeting separately is certainly an option in the transformative model if the parties wish to do so. Here, neither seemed interested in the option, and it is not the mediator's place to call a caucus. Process decisions belong to the parties, not the mediator. 2. The second general area deserving comment pertains to the shifts the parties make in this segment, following the mediator's summary and check-ins. Both Elizabeth and Julie make empowerment and recognition shifts, and the shifts are clear and visible. First, it is clear that, beginning with the mediator's first summary, both parties, but especially Julie, are realizing that they have important choices to make and are deliberating about them. Julie is silent from the mediator's summary until she begins speaking after his second check-in. She's obviously thinking things through, deciding what to do. She seems to realize that something needs to happen if there is to be any resolution, which she said was her goal. This thoughtful deliberation itself is an empowerment shift for her. As a result, Julie makes a decision to admit that Elizabeth is right, that in the covenant there is nothing about painting, which she states calmly and deliberately. Further, she explains that the committee acted based on its interpretation of the covenant and offers her proposal to go to the board. Her concise and articulate statement of all this shows plainly her increased calmness, clarity, and decisiveness. Beyond this empowerment shift, Julie's admission to Elizabeth that "you're right," like most admissions made voluntarily, also shows a greater responsiveness to Elizabeth, a recognition shift reflecting her acknowledgement that Elizabeth's views have validity. The same shift is implicit in Julie's board proposal. Consider this. If the mediator had tried to steer the parties to look at the contract earlier, it would have largely preempted this self-determined decision-making and acknowledgement by Julie. As transformative theory predicts, a shift in one party has impacts on the other. Here, following Julie's admission and offer, there is a corresponding shift in Elizabeth, who begins talking in a very different manner than before. First, Elizabeth speaks with a calmness and deliberateness that she has not displayed before this point. From here on, in this segment, her voice is neither raised nor hurried. Second, although it is clear she is considering Julie's proposal about the board, it is equally clear that she has her own ideas about it, and she immediately voices her concerns about diversity, fairness, and control. In short, she's standing up for herself with clarity and confidence. At the same time, in using phrases like, "I mean no disrespect," "I mean no animosity," expressed without irony or edge, she is addressing Julie in a tone quite different from the earlier angry accusations. She seems also to be seeing something different in Julie and responding to it. With both Julie and Elizabeth, the shifts that are evident in this segment seem to occur somewhat suddenly. However, without the steps made earlier in the session, these shifts would probably not have occurred at this point. Each of these women has been making choices from the beginning of the session on what she wants to talk about, what she thinks, how she wants to express it. The cumulative impact of these choices and the clarity and confidence gained through them produces the sudden shifts here. Shifts like those made in this segment often seem to be fleeting rather than lasting changes in the interaction. That is, retreating from empowerment and recognition is common in transformative mediation. As with the sudden appearance of shifts, the mediator sees their sudden reversal as a natural part of the cycle of conflict transformation and is not discouraged by it, as demonstrated in the next segment of the session.
The Purple House Mediation, Segment 4.
Does the idea of taking the matter to the board as a next step, in whatever fashion you described how you'd like to see that done, does that seem like in general something that would make sense to you?
The challenge that I have with that is we had reached an impasse, is that a word?
Whatever.
Much long ago. And why wasn't that done prior to our meeting with you? I mean, if that could possibly be a resolution, why is it addressed here? Why not then?
Before coming to
here.
Mediation.
Yeah, exactly. If that could certainly, if all means had not been exhausted to solve this problem that they have,
the association.
Then why now?
Is there an answer to that you could offer?
Probably not one that would satisfy you.
Well, please don't do that. Don't do that.
In other words, don't assume what will or won't satisfy you.
Don't assume. Don't think. Don't please. Just answer the question.
I hope that two of us would be able to, or the three of us with a mediator would be able to work it out. And where the committee stands on this is very clear. It seems like maybe we aren't going to be able to work it out, in which case I'm offering, another
Why didn't
option.
you do that before?
I don't want to go to court. I don't want the publicity. I don't want the expense.
The color of our house.
Well, sure, but I mean, I said that at the outset.
So we would like a lot of other houses change their
And you
color
said
also.
that. What if you put up a hedge or something to mask it, filter the color of
What
the
if all
house?
the people that have their house blue and teal and salmon paint their house all white?
Well, we
It
like a
seems like
little
a personal
color.
thing,
We like a
Julie.
little color.
It seems like a personal thing, whether you like blue or whether you like purple. It seems personal.
It is partially personal.
And it seems like maybe you
but
got
I'm
with a
not
lot
here
of
as
personal
an
people
individual.
that didn't like purple.
But
like blue,
Maybe, right.
But your feelings, you're not a neutral person. You're not a neutral party.
That's
So
true,
that's-
Elizabeth, but if I didn't agree with the position that the committee had taken, I would still, as chairman of the committee, have to come and fairly represent it.
But it's a double-edged sword with you being chairman of the committee and you're agreeing with the committee. Is that you're arguing? You're not arguing in a way that certainly defends my right as a home buyer or our right, and you're not impartial. So it has a different.
Well, neither of us is impartial.
I don't have to be. I'm not on a committee. I'm not representing the community. I'm representing my family. So I don't have to be impartial.
This doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I'm chair of a
It
committee.
doesn't make sense to us. We don't know why we're here today, to tell you the truth, Julie.
And the more we talk about it, the more trivial it becomes. Really. I mean, it's so ridiculous. The color of our house. Come on.
Well,
I'm getting a headache. I really am.
I guess one question that I could ask you at this point, and if you're finding this unproductive, it's your choice with how far you continue the conversation. There were a couple of things so that, Elizabeth, if you're ready to check out at this point, Julie, if you're frustrated, you have choices to make about whether you want to go on with this or just, see this as an opportunity that didn't work out and take whatever next step there is. There were some, before you do that, maybe it's worth just reaching some closure on the question of, does it make sense to follow up on the suggestion of going in some way to the overall board of the association? You had a notion, Elizabeth, that if that were going to happen, and I didn't get a sense that you were clear that you necessarily wanted it to, but if it were going to happen, you would be more comfortable with it, some sort of a different process than just having Julie or her committee bring this to the board. She would want that to include some input from either yourself or other people in
I'm just really upset that you assume that when someone doesn't agree with you, it's racial. I'm really having a problem with that. I don't understand that. I told you I have a son-in-law who's African American. I am not
Julie,
a racist.
I'm not going to deal with your guilt.
I'm not feeling guilty.
I'm not going to deal with your guilt and defense.
I think it's an unfair accusation.
I think a lot of
everybody
things
with
are
white
unfair.
skin does not have racial bias.
I'm not talking about everybody with white skin. I'm talking about you.
So if I don't agree with something you've done, that makes me a
I'm not talking about your
racist?
disagreeing with me.
Well, then, how do you hook this into racism?
I really don't want to go into it.
You
It's just too
did.
deep.
You brought it up. You started it. To me, this was an issue of homeowners and colors and covenants.
I'm sure.
And you threw the racism into this.
That's right. I
cannot
did. I'm
just
sure
let this
I threw
stop
the
at that.
racism.
You did.
Yes, I'm sure I did.
You did. You cited a series of events
And they
in
are
your
true.
life.
They are absolutely
I do
true.
not dispute that they're true. I do have a problem with your attributing them all to me. Is that okay that I'm having a problem with that? And you call that guilt? That's not guilt. You've painted a picture of me, and that's not an accurate picture, and I'm having a problem with it.
Well, Julie, I think what my mom is basically saying is that our house is mauve, our neighbor's house is blue, they are Caucasian, and their kids are friends of mine, and we go to art school together. You don't have a problem with their blue, their deep blue, but you have a problem with our mauve. So she's wondering, yes, is there a racial thing going on
And in
here?
addition to several other things, which we've please.
I do see a difference between a purple house and a blue house.
That's a
I
preference.
do. I do.
That's a preference.
Well,
It
it
seems
isn't
like a
just a
personal thing.
preference. It's
I do not want to go
how many
back
purple
over all
houses have
this.
you seen in your? I mean, there
Who
are
really
a lot
cares?
of them. They're not a sort
what?
of standard house color.
So what? What's standard?
Well, this is a community that has a certain
What are you trying to say? That has a certain what?
relatively conservative, predictable,
Well, we're
visual tenor to it.
Well, we're not conservative and we're not predictable. Now what?
You have a problem with us, Julie?
You personally?
Yes.
No. No, I don't, except when your mother calls me a racist. I'm
You
having
are.
a real...
Yeah, you are.
How do you know that? Because I don't like the color of your house? This makes me a racist?
Oh, God.
Isn't that a simplification?
Please, can we end this torment?
Well, you can end it any time you want to. You have, each of you, put issues on the table, and anytime you want to, you can stop talking about them, talk about different
Every
ones.
racist I know says, I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist. My best friend is black. I'm not a racist.
I'm an artist. I love our purple house. I love my neighbor's blue house. And I love the salmon and the blue trimming that our other neighbors have. I'm an artist, and maybe Judy would like to come to art class with me.
You have a great daughter.
I know.
You have a great daughter.
I know I do.
Well, where do you want to go, folks?
I've offered to take it to the board. I'm perfectly happy to come up with some neutral presenter if that would help.
If you want to take it to the board with a neutral presenter, fine. Fine. I want you to know that irregardless, we are not changing the color of our house. So if you feel if it will assuage you to take it to the board, fine.
Well, if I take it to the board and they disagree with the control committee's, the architectural control committee's interpretation of this particular clause, then it'll end there, right? So that would be a resolution. I can't say I'd be thrilled with it, but it would be a resolution. If I take it to the board or some neutral person takes it to the board and they agree with the committee's interpretation of that clause, then we're where we are right now, and then we'll see where we go from there.
I hope we go to a court of law with a jury of our peers.
Elizabeth, I just want to check out with you and also with you, Julie. Obviously, you're not happy about all the circumstances. Are you comfortable with that as a decision with where to take things and where to leave them today? In some ways, again, I don't want to read things into what you're saying, Elizabeth. Just sort of listening to the way you describe that particular step, would you be more comfortable saying, I'm just thinking like in the opposite terms, would you be more comfortable saying, you know what, it doesn't really make sense to delay things, let's just let this go on to the lawyers and let the chips fall where they may? Is that more comfortable to you?
I feel that it may come to that, but if we're sitting here thinking, oh, there is one more step that we can take by going to the board, and we have certainly a neutral representative, and we can perhaps resolve it in that way, then I am certainly not unwilling to try that. But I am mindful that the board nor the committee is diverse, or reflects the diversity of the community. So I almost say it with a sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I am willing to certainly be pleasantly surprised at a neutral or outcome. But I do know that I do not foresee that anything the board or the committee can say at this point that would make Bernice or I repaint our home. and probably before they would, or put a hedge up and with the beautiful light that we have coming in with those beautiful windows to obscure it with high bushes to hide because of somebody's obvious taste problem. I don't think we will do that either. So we are very clear that we are not going to change the house. We are very clear that, and really in our hearts and souls, feel that we have not violated the covenant of the Architectural Control Committee. So I'm going a long way to say, of course, we will try that step. And if that step doesn't work, then they will have to do what they have to do.
And does that, and it sounds like you'd have no problem, you're sort of saying right now that everyone should know that your position is that you're willing to take that step, let this be considered again, but that if the decision is the other way, that you still feel strongly that this is within your rights.
We can have our day. Yeah, I feel strongly, and we can have our day in court.
And given that that's so, Julie, that difference is still there, does that still seem to be a useful step for whatever, from your purposes?
Well, it might be a simpler resolution. I mean, the possibility is there that the board will make a different ruling, and if they do, then that would, take care of it. So, yeah, sure, it's not ideal, but it seems like a smart next step.
I'm sorry.
Well, and if you were going to take that particular next step, is it worthwhile talking more here about how that, and I'm mindful of the fact that, again, there have been other things as well put on the table, and you're certainly free to talk about those or not as in terms of how you feel, what you feel is appropriate to talk about in terms of the other issues that you've mentioned. That's a possibility. It's also might be, do you want to also talk further about, if you're going to take this next step, how that would work? I'm not exactly clear on what it would mean to have a neutral representative. I don't have to be clear about that, but you might want to. What does that mean? How would that next step take place? Is that something that it makes sense to spell out further, or are you comfortable just leaving it generally?
I think we kind of put it on the table. I mean, I think if we have to go through the motions, which I don't think is necessary, but to court and everything, I think it's pretty clear that it's a personal thing. It's not anything obscure as they making it sound like it is.
Right, and I'm actually asking about this notion of letting the
previous step, right?
How is it? What are the pragmatics involved?
Elizabeth, how would it be if I drafted a letter, and I know that I'm not a neutral, I understand that, and couched it in as neutral a way as I can, and I showed you the letter, and you edited it any way you wanted to, and between the two of us, we came up with a neutral presentation of the two sides for the board.
I think, why don't you and Bernice do it?
Would you be willing to do that with me?
Sure.
Okay.
Commentary, Segment 4. In the early part of this segment, the interactional shifts evident at the end of Segment 3 seem to disintegrate as the parties get caught in a replay of their earlier disagreements about both the House and racism topics. However, by the end of this segment, not only have the parties regained a more positive interactional ground, they have also reached some fairly concrete plans to deal with the question about the House. 1. This segment is an example of how, in transformative mediation, conversation tends to cycle in non-linear fashion, up and down, forward and back, but nevertheless leads to interactional gains as well as transactional resolutions. As in the previous segment, note the work done not only by the mediator but by the parties. The first indication of a seeming movement back occurs when the mediator checks in with Elizabeth about her commitment to the board proposal. In response, she expresses doubts about both the motivation and the fairness of the proposal. What prompts the check-in here is the signal that Elizabeth sends at the end of segment 3 in her acceptance of the proposal. Her words and tone suggest uncertainty about the decision, and the mediator's job is to help Elizabeth and Julie gain clarity and make decisions confidently, so a check-in is called for. Seeing such uncertainty, the mediator is willing to have an agreement unravel in order to support Elizabeth in making choices clearly. He is highlighting her uncertainty for her, rather than ignoring or minimizing it in order to nail down an agreement. Just as forward shifts feed into each other, one party's retreat feeds the others. After several minutes of Elizabeth expressing her doubts and suspicions of Julie's proposal, Julie returns to her angry rejection of the racism accusation, and they seem to be back where they started. Despite the apparent recycling and reversals, closer examination of the parties' exchange here shows that they actually make real gains in terms of empowerment shifts. In effect, there is an overall forward dynamic, despite appearances. Elizabeth asks new questions about the process by which the matter was brought to mediation, as well as the process by which it would be put to the board. Julie makes new statements about why she can't understand the accusation of racism. Rather than going over the same ground, each goes more deeply into the points that concern her. They are not going around in circles, but spiraling into the heart of the matter. They are gaining in clarity about what's at issue and what their views are, an empowerment shift for both. In addition to gaining clarity about the topics themselves, another clear indication of empowerment is found in the quality of both Elizabeth and Julie's statements in this segment. Specifically, each one's statements are noticeably more articulate and powerful than earlier in the session. In effect, Elizabeth and Julie both develop into strong advocates for themselves in this segment, making solid arguments to explain their views. For example, when Julie says regarding the possible partiality of a board review that neither of us is impartial, Elizabeth immediately answers, "I don't have to be," she points out. "I'm not representing the committee, I'm representing my family." Communal representatives, not families, need to be impartial, a striking and powerful argument. Here's another example. To explain why she's so upset by the charge of racism, Julie tells Elizabeth, "I do not dispute that the events you mentioned here are true. I do have a problem with you attributing them all to me. You've painted a picture of me that is not an accurate picture, and I'm having a problem with it. This picture is not me." A clear, powerful statement. In short, both parties here are posing strong questions and offering powerful responses. They are speaking up for themselves more clearly and coherently than before, the empowerment shift in concrete form. 2. In this segment, the mediator's responses are very much geared to his awareness of the parties' empowerment shifts and his desire to support and not thwart them. During most of this segment, the mediator intentionally steps out of the discussion. He listens and follows the parties' exchange closely, but does not intervene. At the beginning of the segment, the mediator is briefly involved in the question-answer between Elizabeth and Julie, probably because it grows out of his initial check-in with Elizabeth and her response to him. Then he sees the emerging empowerment shifts. He hears the parties talking over each other less and to each other more. Their tone is not friendly, but there is a sense of both strength and engagement on both sides. He therefore stays out, because to intervene too much here would deprive the parties of opportunities to speak for themselves and to each other, the opposite of supporting party shifts. When the mediator does intervene in this segment, his interventions are almost all check-ins. In each instance, he is responding to either a signal that a party doubts the value of continuing the discussion or a signal that a party is uncertain about a particular decision. In general, a check-in highlights a decision point and asks one or both parties what they want to do, in order to support them in making deliberate, clear decisions. In form, a check-in may or may not be joined to a brief reflection or summary and often takes the form of a question. As noted previously, the segment begins with a check-in with Elizabeth about her acceptance of Julie's board proposal, prompted by her tone of uncertainty. the mediator offers 2 more check-ins when, at different points, Elizabeth complains of the triviality of the discussion and asks, "Can we end this torment?" In each case, the mediator takes the remarks seriously and invites both parties to consider whether they want to end or continue. A transformative mediator is careful to make sure that the party's option to end the mediation at any time is real, not fictional. So any statement of this kind is taken at face value and explored. Interestingly, after each check-in, Elizabeth decides to continue the conversation, but because of the check-in, her decision to do so is a clear and intentional one. In effect, she is deciding, "I have more to say here." Toward the end of the segment, the mediator does another check-in after the parties return to the board proposal, and Elizabeth accepts it, but again in a tone indicating misgivings. This check-in is more elaborate, actually inviting her to reconsider and perhaps change her mind and go on to the lawyers. Note the impact of this check-in on Elizabeth. She pauses, reflects, gathers her thoughts, and comes to a clear decision to go ahead, and then explains herself in a very articulate and confident way, even using the words "very clear." In short, she makes a visible empowerment shift. The dynamic of her shift carries the discussion forward so that by the end of this segment, the parties have, for all practical purposes, made strong, clear decisions on how to deal with the question of the Purple House. As this segment closes, it might appear that the discussion is done and the mediator could wrap things up. But in the transformative model, only the parties decide when they are done. As seen in the next chapter, they have not yet come to that point, and the mediator remains ready to follow the parties wherever they might decide to go next.